It was a quiet December night in suburban Ontario, the kind of night when homes glowed with Christmas lights and families gathered around the tree. Inside the Homolka house, laughter echoed, wrapping up what seemed like a perfect holiday evening. But as the night deepened and everyone drifted off to sleep, something unthinkable began to unfold in the basement. Moments later, a panicked call to 911 shattered the stillness. A young girl was found unconscious, her sister trembling beside her. What had started as a festive family celebration would soon turn into one of the most chilling and disturbing crime stories in Canadian history. A story of obsession, manipulation, and unimaginable betrayal hiding behind the image of a perfect couple. No one in that peaceful neighborhood could have imagined the darkness that lived just beyond their doorstep. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. Carla Homolka grew up in a seemingly ordinary Canadian family. A few years after her parents, Dorothy and Carl, married, their household grew with the arrival of their daughters, Lori first, and then, in 1975, the youngest, Tammy. Carla's childhood was uneventful, filled with school activities and a close family life. As a teenager, she attended Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School, where she quickly stood out. Teachers described her as bright and responsible, while her classmates saw her as someone to admire, confident, outgoing, and always eager to help. During those years, Carla joined an all-girls group known as the Diamond Club, a secretive social circle that encouraged its members to pursue success through charm and ambition, and, as rumors suggested, to marry well. Outside of school, she worked part-time at a local pet store, spending her afternoons caring for animals and chatting with customers. It was in the fall of 1987, when Carla was 17, that her life took a dramatic turn. At a restaurant during a work conference, she met 23-year-old Paul Bernardo from Toronto. Recently graduated as an accountant, Paul was handsome, articulate, and charismatic, the kind of man who seemed to have his future mapped out. But beneath that polished image lay a deeply troubled past. Paul's childhood had been scarred by a tense home life and a mother struggling with severe depression. Despite this, he worked hard to build the perfect facade, excelling in school, taking on extra jobs, and cultivating the image of a charming, successful young man. He was intelligent and ambitious, but also increasingly drawn to control and dominance. In high school and college, Paul's attitude toward women began to shift. He surrounded himself with arrogant, reckless friends, and slowly his behavior darkened. Though he was still attractive and outwardly polite, those close to him began to notice flashes of cruelty. Yet few could imagine the reality beneath his calm exterior. When Paul and Carla met, their connection was instant. Carla was captivated by his confidence, while Paul saw in her the perfect partner, someone who not only adored him, but also seemed to understand and even encourage his most disturbing fantasies. Soon, they became inseparable. Paul showered her with gifts, romantic dinners, and affection. Within months, Carla was wearing a ring he had given her, proudly showing it off to friends and family. But as 1987 came to an end, the city was shaken by a series of sexual assaults targeting young women near bus stops and quiet neighborhoods. The press dubbed the unidentified attacker the Scarborough Rapist. When a friend reported Paul to the police as a possible suspect, he was questioned and asked to provide a DNA sample. Investigators, however, dismissed him as an unlikely offender, a devastating misjudgment that would have tragic consequences later. As Paul continued his relationship with Carla, he became a frequent guest in the Homolka home. The family liked him. He was polite, helpful, and seemed genuinely in love with their daughter. After 2 years of dating, he proposed, and Carla accepted with excitement. For her, it was the fairy tale romance she had always dreamed of. By then, Carla had finished high school and was working as a veterinary assistant, while Paul's life began to unravel behind the scenes. He had lost his job but hid the truth, turning instead to cigarette smuggling across the US-Canada border. At the same time, he grew increasingly fixated on Carla's younger sister, Tammy, a disturbing obsession that Carla would later help him feed. In December 1990, just months before their planned wedding, Carla was forced to quit her job after being accused of stealing veterinary drugs. Around the same time, Paul spent Christmas with the Homolka family. He brought along his video camera, capturing cheerful moments, the decorations, the laughter, the three sisters posing for the lens. As the evening came to a close, everyone went to bed. But in the early hours of the morning, Carla dialed emergency services in panic. Her younger sister, Tammy, was lying unconscious in the basement. Sirens broke the quiet suburban night as paramedics rushed to the scene. Tammy was rushed to the hospital, but despite desperate efforts, the doctors couldn't save her. She was only 15 years old. Carla and Paul told authorities that Tammy had been drinking during the Christmas Eve gathering and had simply passed out after overindulging. Carla even claimed that her sister sometimes took tranquilizers, trying to make the story sound plausible. The coroner's report concluded that the death was accidental, the result of alcohol intoxication. 3 months later, the case was officially closed. Neither the family nor the police suspected anything more sinister. To everyone else, it was a tragic accident, a young girl gone too soon. In the months that followed, Carla returned to work at another veterinary clinic and quietly abandoned her plans to attend university, despite being accepted by two prestigious institutions. Life seemed to move on, at least on the surface. Then, in the summer of 1991, Carla and Paul finally got married. They arrived at the ceremony in a white horse-drawn carriage, the picture of a fairy tale couple. The wedding was lavish. Champagne flowed. Fine food was served, and guests toasted to what everyone believed was the perfect love story. But while the newlyweds celebrated their union, horror was unfolding nearby. That same night, in a ditch not far from the venue, the body of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey was discovered. Leslie had vanished days earlier, leaving her family frantic. She was a bright high school student, spirited but sometimes rebellious. Though she occasionally stayed away from home, she always called her mother or younger brother to let them know she was safe. When she stopped answering calls, her family knew something was terribly wrong. The night she disappeared, Leslie had gone to a friend's gathering and missed her curfew. When she finally returned home, the doors were locked. She walked to a nearby plaza to use a payphone, hoping another friend might let her stay over. No one could, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Days later, police made a gruesome discovery. Leslie's remains had been dismembered and encased in concrete blocks, which were later found in a nearby lake. Her braces and dental records were the key to confirming her identity. The brutality of the crime left investigators certain she had been assaulted and tortured before being killed. Yet no clear leads emerged. Almost a year later, in April 1992, another disappearance shook the region. 15-year-old Kristen French was last seen walking home from school. Unlike Leslie, Kristen was disciplined, responsible, and deeply loved by her community. She attended a Catholic high school, earned top grades, and competed successfully in figure skating, winning several medals. She adored her dog and never missed their daily walks. So when Kristen's mother realized her daughter hadn't come home at the usual time, she knew immediately that something was wrong. Within hours, police were alerted, and another search began. By the time police began looking into Kristen French's disappearance, they already knew her habits well: where she walked her dog, the route she took home from school, and her punctual routine. It didn't take long for investigators to conclude that this was not a case of a runaway. It was a criminal abduction. Soon it was confirmed that Kristen had been kidnapped in broad daylight in a busy neighborhood full of passers-by who, shockingly, had noticed nothing unusual. At the scene, detectives found fragments of a torn map, one of Kristen's shoes, and strands of her long brown hair. Witnesses came forward, but their statements provided little to work with. Most could only agree on one thing: the abductor's car appeared to be a dark Chevrolet Camaro. Acting quickly, police began tracking every vehicle of that model in the area, following lead after lead until they finally determined that the car was not a Camaro at all, but a gold Nissan. 2 weeks later, on April 30th, 1992, the investigation reached a devastating conclusion. Kristen's body was discovered in a wooded area several miles from where she was last seen. The site, eerily, was only about a mile from the spot where Leslie Mahaffey's remains had been found the year before. Because Kristen's body had not been dismembered like Leslie's, investigators initially believed the cases were unrelated. But behind the scenes, the truth was beginning to surface. Between late 1992 and early 1993, two major events shifted the course of the investigation. First, forensic scientists finally began testing the DNA samples that Paul Bernardo had voluntarily provided years earlier when he was briefly considered a suspect in the Scarborough assaults. Second, Carla appeared at work one morning covered in bruises. Her co-workers were alarmed. The injuries around her eyes were severe. When she claimed she'd been in a car accident, no one believed her. Concerned, they contacted her parents. The following day, Carla's parents arrived at her home and immediately took her to the hospital. There, doctors documented extensive bruising and facial trauma. When questioned by police, Carla broke down. She said she was terrified of her husband. The assaults, she explained, had begun the previous spring and had grown more violent with time. Paul was arrested but released shortly after giving what officers described as a cooperative statement. Meanwhile, Carla moved out of their home and began speaking in more detail with detectives from the sexual assault unit. Her statements described a life of abuse, a nightmare that had escalated beyond her ability to escape. As police investigations into Paul intensified, now linking him to both the Scarborough rapes and the murders of Leslie and Kristen, Carla hired a lawyer. Her attorney negotiated a deal for full cooperation in exchange for limited immunity. Presenting herself as a battered wife, Carla began revealing horrifying details. She told investigators that her husband was responsible for every act of violence, the rapes, the killings, and the terror that had haunted southern Ontario for years. Paul Bernardo was arrested once again, this time for good. Soon after, forensic results confirmed what police had begun to suspect. His DNA matched the samples from the Scarborough crimes. Investigators also confirmed that his car, a gold Nissan, matched the description from the scene of Kristen's abduction. When Carla appeared on television shortly after, she seemed composed, but shaken. She tearfully told reporters that before she knew the truth, she had cried for the victims, for Leslie, and for Kristen. What no one yet understood was that Carla's role in those crimes went far beyond the story she was telling. According to Carla's version of events, she claimed to be overwhelmed by shock and horror when she discovered what her husband had done. But as investigators soon learned, the truth was far darker and far more complicated than that. When police executed search warrants at the Bernardo home, they were stunned by what they uncovered. The couple's house was a trove of disturbing material: shelves filled with pornographic books and tapes, handwritten descriptions of each abuse Paul had committed, and, most incriminating of all, receipts and DNA evidence linking him directly to the murder of Leslie. Among the items, investigators found a receipt for cement, the very same material used to encase Leslie's remains. But that was only the beginning. Not long after, detectives discovered something that would completely destroy Carla's version of the story: a collection of homemade videotapes. These tapes showed, in horrifying detail, that both Paul and Carla had participated together in the assaults. Carla was not just a bystander, she was an active accomplice. Faced with undeniable evidence, her lawyer rushed to negotiate a deal. In exchange for full cooperation, Carla would serve just 12 years in prison for each of the 3 known victims, sentences to run concurrently. She would also be eligible for parole after a little more than 3 years and serve her time in a psychiatric facility rather than a traditional prison. In return, she had to tell the full truth. She agreed. While undergoing psychiatric evaluation, Carla wrote a letter to her parents that stunned investigators. In it, she confessed what no one had suspected. Both she and Paul were responsible for the death of her younger sister, Tammy. On Christmas Eve of 1990, Carla had given her sister to Paul as a gift. He had often told Carla how attractive Tammy was, and rather than reject his obsession, she decided to make it possible. She obtained sedatives from a veterinary clinic and mixed them into Tammy's drink. Once the girl was unconscious, they applied a chemical anesthetic to her face and began recording the assault in the basement. But the drug proved too strong. Tammy stopped breathing. Panicked, they tried to revive her but failed. Before calling 911, they cleaned up the scene, dressed her, and carried her upstairs to make it appear she had simply passed out after drinking. To everyone else, her family, the paramedics, and the police, it looked like a tragic accident. But the horror didn't end there. Months later, just before their wedding, Carla planned another gift for Paul, this time a living victim. She invited a 15-year-old girl she had befriended at the pet shop where she used to work. The teenager admired Carla, seeing her as a glamorous older sister. Carla offered her an alcoholic drink laced with sedatives, and when the girl lost consciousness, Paul and Carla assaulted her, filming the entire ordeal. The next morning, the teenager awoke groggy and sick, believing she had simply drunk too much. Then came Leslie. Paul encountered the 14-year-old near her home after she'd been locked out late at night. He offered her a cigarette, then forced her into his car. Carla later claimed that Paul had threatened the girl with a knife, while Paul insisted she went willingly. Both agreed that Carla had not been present during the abduction. For the next 24 hours, Leslie was held captive in their home, repeatedly assaulted. They even handed her a stuffed animal, a chilling act of mock comfort. Eventually, she died. Carla said Paul killed her to prevent identification. Paul, in turn, claimed she overdosed while he was out of the room. Both admitted they panicked and tried unsuccessfully to resuscitate her. Then, in an almost unthinkable scene, they hid Leslie's body in the basement while hosting a Father's Day dinner for Carla's family upstairs. Carla made every effort to stop her mother from going downstairs. After the guests left, the couple dismembered Leslie's body and encased the remains in concrete blocks before dumping them in a nearby lake. Their next victim was Kristen. The couple spotted her walking home. Carla got out of the car, holding a map, pretending to be lost. When Kristen approached to help, Paul ambushed her with a knife and forced her into the car. Back at their house, the same pattern unfolded: alcohol, videotaped assaults, and captivity that lasted for 3 days. With Easter Sunday approaching and Carla's family expecting them for dinner, they decided to end it. Paul later blamed Carla for striking the fatal blows. She claimed Paul made the decision himself. Before disposing of Kristen's body, they cut her hair to hinder identification. As the details became public, the case exploded into a national scandal. The videotapes, the brutality, and the plea deal given to Karla Homolka horrified Canada. Public outrage erupted when people learned she would serve only 12 years for her role in multiple murders. In court, Carla was formally charged with manslaughter, not murder. The distinction shocked the public, but the psychiatric report submitted during her evaluation played a decisive role in shaping the plea deal. According to the psychologist who examined her, Carla had been fully aware of what was happening during the crimes, yet felt utterly powerless to stop it, paralyzed by fear and emotional dependency on her husband. When her trial began in the summer of 1993, it immediately became a media circus. Journalists from across the country flooded the courtroom, eager to capture every detail of the Ken and Barbie killers. But as the proceedings went on, the court imposed strict restrictions. Reporters were asked to leave, and only limited details could be made public to prevent influencing the future jury for Paul Bernardo's trial. In the end, Carla was sentenced to 12 years in prison, a punishment that many saw as shockingly lenient for such heinous crimes. Anticipating outrage, the prosecutor explained that without her cooperation, the truth might never have come to light. He argued that Carla posed little risk of reoffending and that her testimony was essential to convict Paul. 2 years later, in 1995, Paul Bernardo finally faced trial for the murders of Leslie and Kristen, as well as more than 40 sexual assaults. By then, he and Carla were divorced. She testified against him, and the videotapes, which showed the couple's joint participation in the crimes, became key evidence. The trial was closed to the public to prevent the footage from being leaked, but rumors about its contents horrified the nation. Paul's defense tried to destroy Carla's credibility, calling her deceitful, manipulative, and devoid of remorse. But the evidence was overwhelming. On September 1, 1995, Paul was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For his safety, he was placed in solitary confinement. Inmates convicted of crimes like his were never safe among the general prison population. Carla, meanwhile, appeared to transform behind bars. She maintained good behavior, earned a degree in psychology with excellent grades, and cooperated with authorities. Surprisingly, despite everything that had happened to their younger sister Tammy, Carla's older sister Lori continued to support her. Lori even encouraged Carla to change her appearance and rejoin the family once she had served her sentence. On July 4, 2005, after serving her full sentence, Carla walked out of prison. She was released under strict conditions. She could not contact other criminals, and she was forbidden from being alone with minors. Just days earlier, Paul had given a new statement to his lawyer and the police. He claimed he had wanted to let the girls go, but that it was Carla who insisted they shouldn't be released, an accusation that reignited public debate. In the weeks that followed, Carla's name once again dominated the headlines. A local newspaper published accusations claiming she was still in contact with known criminals. In another interview, Carla said she simply wanted to rebuild her life, that she understood the conditions she must live under, and that she hated being seen as a danger to children or anyone else. By 2010, reports surfaced that Carla might apply for a pardon, a move that would seal, though not erase, her criminal record. The possibility sparked immediate backlash, and within months, the Canadian government passed new legislation making pardons for serious offenders much harder to obtain. 2 years later, a journalist tracked Carla down. She was living quietly on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe under a new name. She had remarried and become a mother of 3. Tanned, thinner, and cautious with strangers, she appeared, according to the reporter, to be a devoted mother. Then, in 2017, her name returned to the news once again. Reports revealed that Carla had volunteered at a private elementary school in Montreal. She had accompanied students on a field trip and even brought her dog to a classroom activity. Though she was never left alone with children, the revelation caused outrage among parents. The school quickly updated its policies to ban anyone with a criminal record from volunteering, effectively ending Carla's involvement. The incident reignited a nationwide debate. Can someone with a past as dark as Carla Homolka's ever truly reintegrate into society? Can rehabilitation and forgiveness exist after such unimaginable crimes? Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.